Chapter 1. Rick Barley was born at night on the Long Island Sound under what he thought was a full moon. It was actually a waning gibbous, one night past full. He was born an adult, with a fully working vocabulary and understanding of grammatical constructs and a passion for complex concepts. He became aware of these qualities during his hour of floating immersed in the salty waters of this ancient glacial lake. He had no idea where he was in relation to anywhere else. He had no idea of anywhere else. Everything that was happening each moment was out of his hands. He didn't try to fight the currents or the waves. He was at peace, relaxed, and floating in this new world. He felt cold. He knew that he had been warmer before his awakening, before his birth. He wondered almost immediately after his awakening where he had come from. He had tried to remember, but everything was foggy, eerie. He could see non-specific shapes in his mind. He knew he had a memory of something before this, but he couldn't bring that past into focus, into this present. The effort he was putting into these memories drained him and made him uncomfortable. So he made the decision to stop trying to access the past. The present was, aside from numbing cold, much more pleasant and quiet. He focused on his surroundings. The sky was clear. He saw the stars sparkling above him, and tried to count them. After 5 minutes, he gave up. He began thinking about the infinite immenseness that surrounded him. Rick knew that the stars were glowing balls of burning gases millions of miles from where he was. He knew that he was on a planet named Earth. He didn't know anything more specific than that about his location, other than he was surrounded by water, salt water. Each piece of information, every word that came into his mind, seemed unfamiliar, as if each thought were new to him. He had noticed little things around him. His mind responded with this language, a language his mind told him was English, to help him explain them. He realized them as his own current innovations, not his memories of some larger past knowledge of the world. After about an hour of floating aimlessly around Long Island Sound, Rick Barley noticed that the lights on the northern horizon were getting larger and more distinct. His mind interpreted this information for him, and he realized that he was approaching land. He became excited by the prospect of discovering where exactly on Earth he was. He decided to swim to shore in an effort to speed up his arrival. He reached out with his right arm in the direction of the lights and plunged it underwater, pulling it back towards his side. Then he followed with the other arm. Reach, plunge, pull. Each time he completed a rotation, the process sped up a little bit. Soon he was moving faster than he could consciously think about the motions. His mind started wandering again. He realized that he was also a good swimmer. He had reached the shore. As he reached the shore, wet sand blended with rocks. Rick told himself that these were pebbles. He tried to stand, but the pebbles hurt the naked sole of his left foot. Rick was tired. He decided to stay laying on the surface around him. The tired sensation was stronger than the cold he felt across the surface. Rick fell asleep. Gotis of brokenness. Chapter 2. Luckily, Rick fared much better than his boat had after the incident on Long Island Sound. As a matter of fact, he was lucky to have been cast overboard when he had, for by the time he had awakened on the shore, his boat had been struck by a freighter and sent some 80 feet to the bottom of the Sound. The captain of the freighter, Johansen Knudsen, had been unaware of the relatively small craft bouncing about in the turbulent surf until the bow of his own craft smashed through it. The engine stopped and the crew ran to the bow, searching frantically for signs of any survivors amidst the wreckage. None were found. By the time the Coast Guard arrived on the scene, some hour and a half after the impact, any hope of locating and rescuing the crew had been abandoned. Johansen was ordered to proceed to the port in New Haven Harbor, his original destination. There would be no charges filed, and the report was quietly filed away. 2 days later, a small article written by Sparky Carmichael appeared on page 4 of the Filler Herald. Carmichael had interviewed Johansen over the phone to discuss his recollection of the events leading up to the tragic accident. In a rich Scandinavian accent, Johansen calmly recounted the events to Carmichael. "Ja, it was dark out that night. Was waves throwing spray around. Then we heard crushing wood and felt the whole rig shudder. There was nothing we could do. There was no follow-up to the tiny... I wrote that in... Sorry. There was no follow-up on the tiny fourth page write-up on the accident because it was assumed that the crew of the vessel that had not survived. No one would notify Dick Farley's father, a respected architect and his only living relative. For 3 weeks that Dick Farley had died at sea, doing what he loved best. Gotas the Brokenness. Chapter 3. Rick Barley awoke for the second time on the northern shore of Long Island Sound. It was a night towards the end of November, around 11 o'clock. He was cold and wet, and it was raining hard. The wind was blowing in from the west at a good clip, and the teeth of it bit through his saturated clothing. He had only one shoe on, his other foot was bare. This awakening on the shore of Long Island Sound was much more than a standard movement in state of consciousness from being asleep to being awake. This awakening was much more like a birth. 2 hours earlier, he had been Dick Farley, a young and wealthy architect. Dick Farley had made a name for himself and was shunned by many respected architects for his irrelevant designs combining traditional Asian and Southwestern American design elements. Dick Farley had been, previous to the current moment, enjoying a night out on the waters of Long Island Sound over 100 miles southwest of his home on Cape Cod. More specifically, he was temporarily escaping what had become to him the humdrum and pretentious surroundings of his daily life. More specifically, he was in the process of preparing his boat, a 30-foot sailing vessel, for an impending tropical storm, Manuel. Even more specifically, he was in the process of lowering the sails and tightening the lines when he lost his footing, tumbled overboard, cracking his head on the port side mooring cleat before slipping into the frigid waters. His last thought as Dick Farley was, "At least I went doing what I loved most." This was true since his boat, the Arch-I-Tech, was the only escape from the world he despised. He was also known in his community for his extended absences alone aboard his vessel. Rick didn't remember any of this. When he awoke 2 hours later on the shore of the Sound, he was no longer Dick Farley. He was not yet, as a matter of fact, Rick Barley either. He was in a rare state, without identity. He was, and would remain, for the next 27 minutes, absolutely no one. Tabula rasa, incarnate. It would not be until he met a woman named Carolina Rose near the seawall at the top of the beach he had landed on that he would actually be anyone. He would become Rick Barley. He would live with his amnesia without admitting it, not even to himself, for the next 3 weeks. Rick Barley would silently deny his annoying inability to remember for the next 3 weeks, until a man named Barry Nutmeg, a man who would become the closest thing to a friend Rick would ever know, helped Rick get over this purgatorial state of existence and figure out who he really was. Gotas the Brokenness. Chapter 4. Carolina Rose sat on the seawall on the Filler shore on nights when she was feeling particularly lonely. Her boyfriend, the man she had been with for the past 4 hours, Barry Nutmeg, was busy at work or at home most of these nights, so she came here alone. She liked being by herself when it was her choice, but not when it was Barry telling her he was too stressed out at work to spend any time with her. When she came here, she would sit on the wall staring out at sea and smoking cigarettes. An act made difficult tonight due to the howling wind and pelting rain of Tropical Storm Manuel. But Carolina Rose sat wet on the wall, lit cigarettes, umbrellaed from the driving rain by her cupped hand. The moisture from her rain-kissed lips soaked into the filter of the cigarettes with each drag she took, altering the cigarette's flavor and making it hard to pull from. Tonight, as usual, Barry Nutmeg was working late at Head Over Advertising. He had a deadline to meet for one of the local clients. Barry was always fighting deadlines, always racing the clock to get his projects done. It wasn't that he procrastinated his work, just that he had so much of it to do constantly. He was the lead writer of the advertising firm, had been for 10 years, since he graduated from the University of New Mexico. As a matter of fact, he was the only competent writer at the advertising agency. He had his hand in every project that came through the office. These facts about Barry's job didn't, however, make Carolina Rose feel any less lonely on nights like tonight, beach nights. The rain also did nothing to make her feel comforted and loved. Carolina Rose flicked the soggy remains of her cigarette butt into the wind and watched it sail and disappear as it hit the surface of the water 20 or so feet away. She thought about lighting another, but then thought better of wasting another smoke to the rain. Go to the broken.